Hey, what's going on everyone? Seth Miranda here for Adorama TV, coming from my studio here in Manhattan because Nikon barged through my door and threw this in my hands, the new Nikon Z5II. This really rounds out the new generation of the Z series in my opinion. We just did the Nikon Z5II video. You can check that out on this channel, put a link down below. And it's kind of a similar narrative here. We're talking about like a redesign of a camera that was made to kind of get that entry level point going on, but they made it so much more capable, it's almost hard to call it entry level anymore. And I'm gonna stick by that statement. This is a 24 megapixel full frame camera, but it's got full stabilization, meaning mechanical stabilization, 7.5 stops, 2 card slots, but it's got the flip out screen, unlike the Z5 original. And the sensor, while it's 24 megapixels like the other one, the previous generation, it's now BSI, backside illuminated. Before it was non-BSI. That pretty much is, in my opinion, gives you a cleaner image at higher ISOs. And I'm gonna say, in my opinion, about by a stop. And if you guys wanna check out what BSI sensors are, you can go check that on your own, what backside illuminated means. But that's kind of just one upgrade. Now we're talking about the EXPEED 7 processor behind that sensor. This is a similar processor that you find in the Z8, the Z9, the Z6 III, the Z5II, the ZF. And I'm gonna say that this kind of reminds me a lot of the ZF, just in a body that's more ready to get to work. And I mean that by, it's not, a lot of, nice retro stuff, and it still has a lot of functionality in there. So with the EXPEED 7 processor, you're looking at similar functionality to what you would find in those cameras, meaning the newer autofocus, the new menus that they put in those cameras. I'm talking about the interface, the subject tracking, the 3D autofocus is in here. So if you're used to what's been going on, the Z6 III, the Z8, Z9, when you put this up to your face, it's gonna feel exactly familiar to what you're aware of in those cameras. So my argument is that while this could be a great entry point for someone at the price point with the features that are packed in it, you could run this as an extra body if you just want something that has a redundancy or a second camera next to what you already have out there. So that's like one story on it. But as far as giving it that, I hate to keep saying entry level because there's really a lot going on here. I'm talking 14 frames per second mechanical, and that means that you are shooting without the worry of an electronic shutter giving you some kind of weird motion distortion. You even have raw video capability in here. The previous Z5 was really feature and spec packed for where we were at that time and for a full frame camera. And it's a similar story here when we're talking about things like raw video capability, but also 4K video that's not cropped unless you want to get up to 60 frames. So the in Z5 original, 4K was cropped. So right there, you're just gaining off the bat. Now the raw video is just raw normal, but just to have that ability to have that flexible file if you want is great. Of course, N-Log internal. That means no external recorder needed for those video functions, and you can actually just take this camera with a lens and just get going. Of course, I had to throw a bunch of strobe at it because that's what we do, right? No, I really wanted to dig into this thing because Nikon is saying this is a photography first camera, and I totally get that. But they did pack a lot of video features in here, but if we're gonna go photography first, let me put it through its photography paces. And here in the studio, I did a bunch of setups with my girl, Kate. She's awesome. She has a very drastic look to her, I'm gonna say, but she's beautiful and very dimensional. So I have a lot to work with. And with this situation, I said, let me use this camera with a lens that you would probably pair with this if you're getting started. So I went with the 50mm 1.4. Very affordable lens, a few $100 on a full frame camera, and I'm able to get that shallow look, that 50mm feel, and it has a nice short minimum focusing distance so I could step in closer to Kate. And with the first setup, I just wanted to go for kind of like, I don't know, like that headshot. You know what I'm talking about? That wall of light headshot. So I set up a B10X Plus from Profoto, put on a 4-foot Octa and edge mask. And I did edge mask. I know some of you are probably like, why did you just use a regular Octa with the diffuser? The edge mask doesn't only just give me that flat light look that I was looking for, but it also gives me control. It also allows me to have more of a sculpty ability rather than like light flying everywhere. It's only coming from where it's expelling off the edge mask. I'm not gonna go into that. If you guys have any questions about edge mask, there is a full live stream of me using it on the Adorama events channel. You can go check that one out. Let me get back to this now. So very simple setup, super wide open, one light behind me, and an awesome model. And this camera just felt, when it was to my eye, the muscle memory was there for me because all the button layout on the back was just like the Z6 III. So that's one of the stories with this as well, is that whenever a brand puts out a whole line of cameras, do they feel cohesive? When you pick up one, do you have to relearn the next one? Or if you have one camera that doesn't match the other one, are you able to work with the same work habits? And you get pretty close to that here with the Z5 II. This camera was really there for me as far as the subject tracking. It wasn't like going, where's the eye? What am I doing? We're shooting really shallow, and I was trusting this autofocus to not only recognize her eye, but stay on her eye. And for the most part, it did pretty good. This is a pre-released model, so this is pre-production firmware. I'm guessing it'll only get better from here, and you're gonna see things get more and more refined as we go forward, because Nikon has definitely shown they support through firmware full on. I mean, we've seen that through the entire Z series. Now, I was actually able to shoot tethered. As of this time, I could not open the RAW files in Capture One. So you're just looking at JPEGs out of this camera. This is straight up. This is what it gave me. Now, one of the things about this camera, it has this picture profile button. This, I usually don't really get into picture profiles. But because they made a whole thing, there's an actual dedicated button, I was like, you know what, let me just take a look at some of these. And I actually kind of leaned on and stayed on the rich portrait profile on this. And I wouldn't normally do that, but I really enjoyed the skin tone that we were getting out of it. Kate was like, oh, that looks great. Stuck with it, kept going with it. And that's what I got right out of camera with a JPEG. So right there, that's kind of the workflow that I'm looking at when you're doing something with this kind of ethos. They just want you to be able to pick up this camera, have a lot of capability, have a lot of options, do what you want to do, but also just make it simple. It is not as big as a Z6 III. That was the first thing I said when they put it in my hand. I was like, oh, this is a small camera, smaller, lighter, lower cost, but still full frame, still 24 megapixels, still giving you 14 frames a second, still giving you raw video. You know, like this is all the stuff that stacks up really quickly. I was actually surprised the TTL works so well in a pre-released model, so that's pretty awesome. And with the first setup down, I was like, let me do something very, very sculpted and see what this could really look like if you're someone that's not just gonna get a cost-effective lens with a good look, but also grow the kit. Higher end lenses, really do some things with it. So I actually moved Kate in front of the edge mask, and edge mask has this really cool thing about it where you can make a global rim light on your subject perfectly even and in one source. So based on her distance, it'll change the way it looks. Again, check out that live stream on the Adorama Events channel, walk through the way that actually works. But I hit her with a gridded beauty dish to really sculpt her out, and then instead of her fading out to the black, I came back with the light from the rims behind her and sculpting her out, raking that light softly across her features. Threw in a reflector, got those eyes to kick, and we're good to go, right? I threw a bunch of lenses at this. We did the 85 1.2, which I know is like an upper echelon lens, but it's Z mount, it's Z series. I'm just trying to get across the point that you don't have to feel like you're stuck with what you might consider an entry-level camera when it's so capable and can use the same glass as the higher end cameras and has a similar autofocus and interface that you can learn and get to know. The other lenses I was using, the 24 to 120, which is one of my favorite lenses out there. It's a very versatile lens, and I would actually recommend it if you're just looking to pair a camera with something from the Nikon Z series. It's got that 24 to 120 range. F4 is pretty good. It's very cost effective, and it has a good short minimum focusing distance, which is why I was able to get shots like these half faces I always do. I know you guys always see them, but I like doing them, so I did them here. Then just to cap everything out, I asked Kate to come out with me on the balcony and just do some natural light shots using the 40mm f2, which is a super budget lens that has a very interesting look to it. And the first time I tried it out, it took me a second to wrap my head around the feel of this lens, but once I did, I'm totally into this lens, and pairing with this camera was a small, light, easy to manage kit, and I was just getting that separation from the busy city, and you got that 40mm that's not quite 50, it's not as wide as 35, it's got this really interesting focal length, and I think you can see the way Kate's face shape changes from all the setups we did here today, from the flat light to the sculpted out light to then going into the natural light with the 40mm. You definitely get a different vibe from the same model, and it was just really, really easy, you know? But this isn't just a camera. I know that Nikon keeps saying like, oh, it's photography first camera. It isn't though, because you've got this flip out screen, and you've also got product autofocus, and that means that you can film yourself. If you've got a YouTube channel, you can hold something up, it'll focus on that product, but you can also set an area of the frame for that product autofocus. This is a big deal. So let's say you're doing kind of an erratic frame and you're filming yourself, but you always want it to focus on whatever you're holding up, and you don't want to block your face. You can just kind of have a cue for yourself wherever you set that focusing zone and you hold something up, it'll just go there. Pretty cool. The other thing that I like is that, yes, it's a micro HDMI, but if you're streaming, you're kind of okay with that. You have minimal things blocking the front of the screen when the micro HDMI is a lot smaller than a full-size HDMI. And if you're streaming, you're gonna leave it plugged in. You're not like plugging it on and off like crazy. But you also don't really need to do just HDMI if you don't want to. You can run the USB-C out of the camera as a webcam, and this will carry power, video, and audio in one cable. So if you're someone that's just throwing this camera down for a Zoom call, one cable, you're good to go. You don't gotta worry about battery power. You don't gotta worry about a capture, whatever. No, you're just doing this, okay? But if you do want like the full resolution, everything you can get out of this camera, I do recommend the HDMI, but you can run power on the USB-C at the same time as the HDMI. And you're streaming, you're recording, you're filming yourself, you're good to go. And if you're like me and you work in environments like this daylight studio, which is a beast to control light in, the raw video files totally help, because sometimes I gotta pull those highlights out of those windows back down so they're not so distracting, and you have that ability here. Really quick, I wanna jump back to this picture control button over here. This is interesting, right? You can actually create your own color grading within Nikon software. And I mean, there's a lot of controls in there, and then you can actually share them with people. So stick with me on this. Let's say you've got a small production team, maybe you're doing something like events, whatever, and you just want everything to match and you've got a definite look to your images. You can now just share all those profiles to each other. Or what's that thing you can be? Oh, communal. You can actually just, connect with other people. You like their style, they like yours, and you can load them into the camera and shoot right there in the camera to the color grade, rather than throwing presets on after the fact and all the other kind of stuff. So a lot going on, a lot of ability, but also super, super familiar. You got the function buttons next to the lens. If you're a Nikon Z shooter, you know exactly what that's about. All the buttons, like I said, are where you remember them to be. So when they handed me this camera, being a guy that shoots Z9, Z8, and Z6 III, I got right into it. That was just all in it. It's not like when we had the EXPEED 6 processor and the interface was different and the menus were different and stuff like that. So just know that. If you're someone that is looking at this camera because you own like a D750 or you own like a DSLR and you've been waiting to make a jump to mirrorless, or maybe you're hesitant to, don't forget, you got the FTZ adapter. Take all your lenses, jump into this, and you're just flying. You're not worrying about what glass. And from my experience with the FTZ adapter, some of my F-mount glass, I think responds faster and better than when it did on just native F-mount on the Z mount. So you might want to look at that if you're looking to get the Z5II. You might want to look at some kind of bundle with the FTZ adapter. Then you're just taking your lenses over from DSLR world over to mirrorless world, and you're moving forward. But really, the story here is, while people are going to kind of label this as entry-level full frame because of the price point and where the Z5 was originally, I would argue that this has so much capability that you could grow with it. You'd be surprised how much longer you'd probably hold on to this before you think to upgrade, unless you need something like higher resolution or you want the stacked sensor or something like that, So you have to really kind of gauge what kind of photographer you are, what kind of creator you are, what kind of workflow you have, and the way you just go about things and what you're really looking for out of your camera. But if you're looking to just get a full frame camera, great image quality that will be like rock solid, I gotta tell you, I'm pretty impressed with the Z5II and what they did with it. I thought they were just gonna throw in the new processor and be like, yeah, but no, they give you pretty much everything you'd expect with that processor that we're seeing with the new EXPEED 7. And I think this really rounds out the Z series as a system, from Z5II as an APS-C all the way up to the Z9, which is like a beast, right? So anyway, that's pretty much a really fast rundown. I can see Fernando's like, oh, would you finish already? Yeah, he's nodding at me. There's just a lot to talk about this camera, and I guarantee you there's gonna be more that we find out as we go forward with it, and who knows what they're gonna do going forward, because they've been surprising us immensely with all the firmware updates. So if you have any questions for me with my short use case here with the Z5II, hit me with a comment down below. I'll be happy to try to answer as much as I can. Don't forget to like, share this video around, hit subscribe and the bell to get notified when we put more videos like this. And I will see you next time. Later.